Hey, Mike, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today. I've been really excited to have you on the show. I can't wait to talk about cyber insurance with you. It's like one of the biggest areas where I feel like people, whether they're small business owners, startup founders, even cybersecurity technical people, really lack an understanding of. I mean, there's even insurance agents that don't know much about it. It's a really complicated area, but absolutely critical, as I say, one of the three important categories of complete cybersecurity. So for anyone that doesn't know Mike, I'm going to give you a quick intro to him. Mike Volk developed and currently leads the cyber risk solutions at PSA Tech Practice at PSA Insurance. In this role, he's responsible for helping clients make informed decisions about technology and cyber insurance and develop strategies to reduce cyber risk. For the past 10 years, he has worked in several roles where he helped individuals and organizations navigate the complex cybersecurity landscape. Mike is also active in the cybersecurity and technology community and currently serves on the board of directors for the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. And if you want to reach out to Mike, we're going to put up his LinkedIn and his email where you can reach out to him and his company, psafinancial.com. So yeah, Mike, thanks so much for being with me today. Really excited to talk to you. Is there any way you could give us like a general explanation of like, what is cyber insurance?
Yeah, Amir. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation too. I think there's a lot of conversation around this topic. So if we can kind of just drill into the specifics and start. I mean, I think this is a perfect place to start. Now, keep in mind there are differences between depending on what type of business you are. So if your primary services are technology, your policy is going to be a little bit different than if you're a more traditional type of business. So for the majority of businesses out there that are buying a cyber insurance policy, whether you're a construction company or a restaurant or an accounting firm, the type of policy that you're going to buy is going to be what's considered a standalone cyber insurance policy. And when I look at a cyber insurance policy, there's hundreds of them out there, as you probably are well aware. But when I'm reviewing a policy, I want to make sure that there's usually 5 key areas covered. So the first area that most people are familiar with are going to be the cyber liability coverages. So let's say you're a business, you're holding data, you fail to protect it, or let's say you fail to protect your network and you spread a virus to somebody else and you're sued. This part of the policy is going to cover your liability. So think of defense expenses, damages, if you're pulled into a lawsuit, the lawyers to defend you. Same thing go with regulations. So if you violate a law or regulation.
Is that what's called third-party risks?
Third-party risks, third-party liability.
Giving other people money when something bad happens.
Yes, and yes, yeah, essentially. So third-party liability. So, if somebody comes against you and says, hey, this breach hurt us, we want you to make us whole. That's what it's designed to cover. And I think what makes cyber insurance policies a little bit confusing is that it also includes first-party coverages. So you've got the third-party liability, and then you've got the first-party coverages. So once you get past the third-party coverages, the second thing I look for are going to be your direct expenses. So let's say you're a business that has a data breach, and okay, now what the heck do we do? Typically the first-party coverages are going to cover things like bringing in a lawyer to figure out, okay, what are our obligations? The legal landscape's getting pretty out of control. So unless you're specialized in this area, you're not going to know who to notify, what to do. And they're also going to bring in forensics. So a forensic investigator is going to help you figure out what happened. Is it still going on? Is it stopped? They're going to work very closely with the lawyer that you hire, because anything that they produce is going to essentially become a privileged work product if you are sued, and you do have to trigger those third-party claims. It's also going to cover things like notification expenses, the stuff that we typically receive as consumers. When somebody's had a breach, it's going to be the credit monitoring, whatever the law dictates. So that's the second piece. The third piece is going to be things that help the business get back to normal. So dust is settled. Let's say it's a ransomware event, because that seems to be what's happening to most businesses these days, unfortunately. So the ransomware has been contained, you figured out what data has been exposed, you started the process to notify, but now you need to restore your data. You need to restore the network. You need to get back to normal, whatever, at whatever degree you can. Maybe you had to spin up some additional servers to, set up a temporary network while your core network was compromised. All of those expenses are going to be covered in either your data restoration or your data restoration and network restoration coverages. So these are the things that are going to help a business get back to operational. The fourth piece is going to be the business interruption expenses. So again, kind of going down this tree here, the next thing that's going to happen once you're back up and running is that you were down for a period of time. So this coverage is going to help you recoup the costs of lost income while you were down. So traditionally, the most important thing for running a business was a business's location. Not so much anymore, especially with what we're going through now. But, if a building burns down now, everybody's set up to work remotely. But what if plan B, which is your remote work environment, goes down? You can't operate. So this is going to cover the lost income, extra expenses. Some policies will even cover things like payroll. Wow. Now, the last and fifth piece that's often built into a cyber insurance policy is cybercrime. So very different than, again, completely switching the intent of the coverage away from data compromises into a theft of money. So whether it's social engineering, somebody being tricked into paying a fake invoice, whether it's somebody hacking into a bank account, things like, we're starting to see utility fraud. Let's say somebody hacks into your internet service provider or a hotspot and spins up a huge bill, or they use your network for cryptocurrency mining, and they get into a cloud environment, spin up a whole bunch of virtual machines, and you're using tons of data. Covers those types of things. Haven't seen any claims on that part of the coverage yet, but you can see how it's possible. So as you can see, these policies are consistently expanding, and there's no base policy that every carrier is
exactly
using.
I think that's that's a really great general explanation, and we'll drill down a little bit on some of those I have questions about, but you allude to kind of a really important point to like someone who's not from the insurance world. Like, people look at their car insurance or even like general liability business coverage, and you're like, this is a cookie cutter thing that's basically the same. You're just deciding which price you want to pay from all the people you get quotes for. But cyber insurance is really different in the sense that like every single business is different. What it needs to protect, is there like regulatory compliance issues? Is there a big, third party risk? Is there a bigger first party risk situation? What might happen if something bad happens that you might need to mitigate? So it makes sense why, well, first of all, most businesses, it seems like, don't have it, but it also makes sense why they need it, and it's hard to get it, and they need the right information, because there's a lot of kind of like generic information that doesn't really help people, or worse, like puts them in a situation where when something bad happens, they don't have the right coverage or have no coverage at all. So before we drill down into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into cybersecurity and insurance in general, and then to PSA. How does someone become a cybersecurity expert like you?
So that was never my intent, honestly. When I graduated college with my political science degree, my goal was to work in government. While I was going through my master's, I worked at a technology company, and I did, first level kind of support, inside sales. That's kind of how I got into technology. When I finished my master's and was able to get into government and that space, what I did, because of the background, was worked in cybersecurity training. So that's when a lot of the cybersecurity training grants were coming out. I worked on one of the first big ones from the Department of Labor in Baltimore City to help roll that out to our region. While I was doing that, I took some of the training that we were providing. So think like, a lot of people here probably like the Net Plus type courses, got that certification, did some other courses to add to what my background knowledge. then I started actually working in instructional development and business development for a cybersecurity training center at one of our local community colleges.
Wow.
And then completely by accident, stumbled into insurance. And one of the reasons why it was on my radar and why I thought it was really interesting is because part of what we did is we also did like corporate training, working with businesses to help them understand cyber risk. So part of my role was to work with experts to figure out, like, hey, so how do we put this together for businesses? And cyber insurance kept coming up. So I was really aware of it. And, you know, when the opportunity came up to really get into cyber insurance, I was really interested for a lot of the reasons that we're kind of talking about today, you know, but this was about 5 years ago when it was even less developed. So again, I think like in most, you know, what I do in cyber risk management and security is not going to be the more technical aspects that you're involved in, but it's more of the business side of it, which has always been kind of where my interest has been. So it by accident, by luck, by following interest, I don't know, probably very similar to how most people get into to different things.
That's super interesting. And I would say, you know, all the different sides, the technical, the insurance, the legal, the compliance, all of them are related. I mean, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I did a advanced computer security program at Stanford, and there was actually an entire lecture about insurance.
Right, that's great.
People.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were teaching, you know, because it's there. There's a lot of business oriented courses in that program for developers. You know, there's even one about like how to talk to a board about security. So like how to, you know, set KPIs.
That's a good one for a lot of. That's a really good one.
Yeah. But so, you know, it's really critical because like all these different sides have to work together. You know, because it's not just about preventing things from happening. You know, if we only focused on prevention, you know, we'd be in a bad shape. So we've got to worry about risk management and what happens after something bad happens and all of that. So that's really interesting. And how long have you been have you been with PSA the whole time?
I have. Yeah. Awesome. So when I started, it was a completely new position, a different approach. They usually don't hire non-insurance people into insurance roles, but it really made sense in this particular area.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many, you know, cyber insurance specialists there are who entirely focus on that and have the kind of awareness about the technology and the, you know, actually what happens when something bad happens. So that's really cool. So what kind of companies have you worked with? Has it changed over time? I mean, I'm sure cyber insurance was like a totally different thing, you know, when you first started till now. Like, has it changed a lot? Like the companies you deal with and how they buy it and why they come to you?
It absolutely has. I mean, you know, even just, you know, 5 years ago when I started, it was the companies that knew they had a data exposure, were already thinking about cyber risk management. And as you know, Amir, how many businesses are thinking about cyber risk management?
Yeah,
it wasn't a lot. So when we started, like a big part of what I was responsible for was more of the education and awareness, which is why the education and training background really came into play when I got into this space, because it was less about educating people on the insurance and more about educating people on their risks and their exposures, and talking to them about what could go wrong and helping them conceptualize this really nebulous cyber risk topic when they hear about, you know, back then it was, you know, some of them heard of Stuxnet. Well, that's, you know, that doesn't matter, or Target, or, you know, those breaches. And they're like, well, I'm a smaller business. Doesn't really matter for me. So it took a lot of time to educate, put information out there, help people connect with the risks. So over time, it you know, after multiple conversations throughout many renewal cycles, we get to a point of where we're working from the larger businesses with the more complex risks now to the small and medium-sized businesses that handle data, that use technology to operate, that have now moved from a physical location where they can do everything to people working remotely. And then more often than not, when we start working with new businesses, they're born in the cloud. I mean, they don't have a data center. They don't have a network. So
on-premises servers
that doesn't exist. So the cyber insurance that we provide is a huge part of their response and recovery, because that's the physical location that becomes the physical location of, you know, 10 years ago. So it's gone from like I said, those kind of more complicated businesses to really businesses of all type, whether it's a physician or a contractor or a technology company, law firms. You think of it. I mean, that's why cyber insurance is so interesting, because it really cuts across all businesses. It's not a specific sector that needs this. It's really any business, unless you're just, still pen and paper and don't use technology and don't have data, which, there's only a handful of those out there still anyway.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I feel like the thing that worries me the most that's really unfortunate is if you look at like the data on like breaches across the country, whether it's like cyber crime related or like privacy data theft type stuff, it's not the really advanced technology companies that are being breached all day long. It's really like, the small businesses, medium-sized businesses, often, and I could be wrong, but I think like the category of most breached company is like construction companies are number one, and like manufacturing is like number two, and then like, technology companies are at the bottom of that list. And like, healthcare companies and financial companies have like maybe regulatory compliance risks, but like, criminals are smart. They're focused on the people they can extract the most value from. And, the data they steal, whether it's personal information or credit cards, it's just a commodity to them. And so like, it doesn't matter if they're stealing it from Citibank or if they're stealing it from a small construction company with like 100 customers in the last year. So, I want to bring more attention, not just from the technical side, but the risk management side for these small businesses, startups, people who are like, we're too small to like think about security or insurance, or, they're really the most vulnerable. And so, I'm curious what it's going to take to get more of those people to understand that. And like you were saying, like they hear about Stuxnet and they're like, or really big, hacks, and they're like, well, that's not going to happen to me. I don't care about that. What they don't hear about is that all day long there's people sitting in, farm type environments, just like generating spam and fake emails to like steal a couple of bucks here and there all day long. So, I hope to see that change, and I think it's starting to happen. So how do they decide, the companies that come to you? Like, what do you think is like, what's the impetus? Like, I know there's a category of them that are like, we know what we're doing. We know we have a well-established organizational security posture, and we know insurance is a part of that. So putting those people aside, how do like the rest of the people come to you? Is it because like something bad has happened to them? They know somebody that's got hacked, or is it like a partner? Like, what's the impetus for like getting in touch with you?
So I'd say there's probably three different categories. I'll try to break it down to keep it simple. So the first category is contract requirements. So a lot of our clients, no matter what type of business you're in, like construction is a great example. They're working with, major utilities potentially, or major like contracting companies or general contractors, and they're flowing down these requirements for cyber insurance. So that's number one. They don't think they're exposed. They don't necessarily think they need to buy it, but it's required to do business. The reality is, of course, they're exposed, and it's good that they have it. So, so that's one, and they don't have much of a choice. So it's really a cost of doing business. The other category are our existing clients. So a big part of what we do is we write commercial insurance. We've been a commercial insurance firm for the majority of our existence. So we may write general liability, workers' compensation, what have you. Part of our process is to talk about cyber risk. So it's an education and awareness over time. So like I said, we start 3 years ago talking about cyber insurance and cyber risk. Maybe they don't understand it the first time we talk about it, or maybe they don't see a need the first time. But after a few years of us explaining to them why it's important, they buy it. Good news is that we've done that, and our, clients buy it, they have claims, and it's covered. The alternative is it not being covered, and, then they're out. The other category is kind of a combination of either they're in a community association. We do presentations all the time where we talk about this, so they come to us asking questions. They have heard of other businesses like them being hit with this. And then we also have partners that we work with very closely. As you might imagine, we can't do everything. So we work with firms that do incident response and forensics and legal. So sometimes they may have clients that just aren't getting the right coverage or have questions. And that's how those conversations develop. So it's kind of a combination. And it's very, as insurance is something that's more relationship based, and it's based on knowing what you maybe don't have, or trying to figure out if you have questions, going to the right place. So between those three, that's the majority of the way that people usually get to us, or get to start asking questions about cyber insurance.
That's really interesting. I find the similar thing on the technology side with, they hear about it. Oh, maybe I don't know. And then after a few months, they see something happen to someone else. And then it's like, all right, well, I better get this before I'm in there,
Very similar. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, switching back to kind of like the coverage exactly. So you said in your definition, like standalone. So correct me if I'm wrong, there is or could be some cyber type or like digital coverages in you'd say like cyber liability standalone policy. So it's possible, is that right? So it's possible to have like a general liability policy that has some coverage that you could consider cyber protection.
Yep. And so, yeah. And it's going to be different for every business, but there's probably three different places where you might find some aspect of cyber coverage. So if you're a small business, you're going to have what's called a business owner's policy. What business owners policies are designed to do are take more complex coverages and kind of bundle them all together for a small and medium-sized business. In there, they often have what's considered throw-in cyber coverage, because it's designed to kind of bridge the gap until somebody's ready to buy a full-blown policy. In many cases, those are built in and it costs, $50. So people just leave it in there forever. The challenge with that is it's not built to be your primary coverage, because it's not going to be at full limits. So we typically won't quote less than $1 million of coverage for any business. Those are going to be max, $100,000, $500,000. And a lot of the first party coverages that I was explaining aren't going to be there at all. So it's a stopgap. So that shouldn't be what businesses rely on. It's a good thing to have if you don't have any coverage. But it shouldn't be relied on. The other place that we can often find some aspects of cyber insurance coverage, and from news, from big, news stories that we've heard of recently, definitely not a place to rely on, would be the property policy. So sometimes if there's a business interruption loss, or if there's some type of damage to software, equipment, what have you, you may find coverage in a business in a property policy. But I think if I remember correctly, I think the NotPetya attacks, 2016, there were some large companies that tried to file claims against their what's considered like all perils property policies, and found that either certain exclusions applied or they didn't have the coverage there. So that's
I can tell you, somebody actually showed me something like that recently, because they're like, here, look, I have coverage. And when I looked at it, there was actually like a sublimit of like, it was $1 million policy, but the sublimit that covered like systems and electronics and whatever was like 100,000.
That's exactly what you see in this. So it's not designed, it's designed to provide some coverage, but that's why the standalone product exists. And the reason this is the case is because cyber insurance has developed over time. So those standard policies, while they didn't cover it specifically, may have been on the hook because they didn't say that they didn't cover it. Now they're excluding it and trying to push it to a cyber policy. Now, the other place that you'll find coverage is cybercrime. There's two places where you could put cybercrime, and it really just depends on the business. There's standalone crime policies, just like there are cyber insurance policies.
Right.
And a lot of times you can build your cybercrime coverages there, which is fine. But they're also available on a cyber insurance policy. Now, the one thing that I always talk about, or the advice I provide with that, is that if you've got a crime policy where your cyber insurance coverages are, you also need to make sure that you've got a cyber insurance policy that covers the other types of things. Because when I've seen, crime claims try to cover things like business email compromise, the crime claims handlers aren't going to follow incident response processes. They're going to want you to go file a police report. They're going to want you to give them a bunch of data. They don't care if somebody's still on your network. Whereas a cyber insurance policy, they're going to make sure that the legal, the lawyers are involved, forensics is done. You're going to law enforcement after you've got that packaged up for them, and then you can file your police report. So it's just a very different process.
So interesting. Yeah. This might be a stupid question, but on those crime policies, is there a distinction between like, outside parties committing the crime or like employee theft or employee cyber attacks? Because I've seen employee cyber attacks. It's not that uncommon.
There's employee dishonesty coverage, which is more of the traditional, like I'm gonna do rounding errors to steal money from the business type of thing.
Right.
There's rogue employees.
Employees that steal, client data.
Yeah, but again, each policy is a little bit different. So it's where you have to look at the details.
Interesting. So technical E&O, where does that fit in? What's that one? Because is regular E&O also technical, or what's technical E&O?
It's very confusing. So for any type of business that provides professional services, whether it's a consulting firm or a government contractor, or I mentioned accountants, there's errors and omissions coverage that protect the services that they provide. Tech E&O is a subset of that. So it's the technology errors and omissions is the same thing as professional liability. But what it does is, for a technology company, it's probably even more important for tech companies than many other professional firms, because it protects them from the liability for the services that they provide. So think of like a managed service provider. They're supporting the IT infrastructure of their clients. If they fail to provide their services, their clients are going to suffer a loss. Or there's many different ways where the contracts that they put in place with their clients could be accidentally violated, or a client could allege that they violated the agreement when they actually didn't. So this is going to protect them if they're sued. So that's what Tech E&O is. Now, the reason it's confusing with cyber insurance is because the best way to provide cyber insurance for a technology company is to build it together with your Tech E&O policy. And the reason we do that is if you have a breach, it's going to cause you to violate your contract with your clients. The last thing that you want is to have one carrier trying to deal with a cyber claim, another carrier trying to deal with your E&O claim, and then potentially pointing the fingers at each other. Dealing with two claims people, it's a nightmare. So that's why it's a little bit confusing. And then a lot of the professional services policies, so think of like associations or marketing firms, they're taking the same approach. So now when I quote, cyber insurance for a marketing firm, we're bundling it with their professional liability. Same approach that we take with technology companies.
So, when people think about getting cyber insurance or considering getting it, there's kind of like two things I think that pop into people's mind. The first is they want like a quick answer of like, well, what's the minimum I need? What's the most basic one that I need? And, they want the quick answer, like, this is it. And the thing is, like, cyber insurance to me seems like one of those things where like, there is no like, this is what everybody should get. And that's kind of what makes it complicated. Every business is so different. They might have more exposure on something and less on another and all of that. And then the second question is like, well, how, and everyone thinks about this with every other type of insurance, but it seems like other insurance makes sense. Like, why does car insurance cost this much for this car and less for that car, or with this driving record and that driving record? What goes into the price? Like, how do they decide how much this costs?
So it's a tough question to answer because it's evolving. And I think the best way to look at it is there's two different types of risk and the way that you model it. So you've got kind of the traditional non-scalable risks. So those are going to be the property, the auto, the, other types of things where there's only a certain amount of loss that you can have. So like, let's say you're writing, property policies for businesses across the country. Only a certain amount of those businesses are going to burn down on the same day. There's only a certain amount of loss because you know exactly how much that building costs. So it won't scale beyond something. Any outliers you can kind of project using like traditional, bell curve. So we know this is the worst case scenario. If we write a bunch of policies, this outlier is going to happen, less and less, or it could happen more. But because we're collecting premium across this entire book of business, we're going to be able to absorb those losses more easily.
Right.
Shifting to cyber, which is more of a scalable risk, that's in your pandemic category, where it is very hard to model. And the other piece is that the law of large numbers that you can usually rely on for the traditional risks doesn't necessarily work as well, because what you don't know think of the SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities,
Exactly.
are more important than what you do know, your technical controls, the things that are working today.
Right,
So
right.
that's why it's hard for us to say, how much does this cost and then how much you should buy. That being said, what we try to do is do a baseline based on, what we believe, based on what we've seen from our other clients, what they're purchasing. We have enough data where we can at least do a little bit of modeling there. And then we can also recommend limits based on the type of business. The challenge that we run into sometimes is we're capped with how much we can provide with any one carrier. So historically, we could do up to $10 million with one carrier. Now it's been chopped back to 5 typically. So we would have to layer up on limits. There's modeling services where you can model risk. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. I think it helps. It's kind of using, at least you've got some data points. But again, modeling and saying this is how much you should buy or this is how much your risk is, it's very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, it's something I try to explain it to people in the way that you've got systemic versus non-systemic risks in this scenario, where like you compare it to like homeowners insurance. Like if you're worried about houses burning down, there's some risk that you might burn your own house down. And then there's some risk that like, there's a wildfire and your whole neighborhood burns down. But in cyber insurance or cyber risks, you've got your non-systemic risk, which is, you could do something to cause a breach. Somebody could do something to you that causes a breach. And then you have systemic risk, which is something could happen and all the houses could burn down. Like Microsoft could be hacked and then everybody's screwed. Or some major breach could affect you in a way that is, the same as everybody else. So
yeah, I think that's a great way to think about, and think about more people moving to the cloud. So let's say so we're a broker, so we kind of sit between the client and the carriers who are doing the underwriting. So imagine you're an underwriter trying to assess this risk for a business that outsources their data processing to 5 different cloud service providers. You have no ability to underwrite those cloud service providers. You have no idea what they're doing to protect the data. All you can look at is the business. So it's just a very complex risk to underwrite.
Totally. And how do you think like things like SolarWinds and stuff like that has changed the cyber insurance?
Directly and quickly, I would say.
Yeah.
So carriers reacted very fast. So some carriers, what they've done is started to put exclusions in policies. They call them specified exclusions, and they'll actually list them in the policy where it says if you've got this versions of SolarWinds Orion, whatever version it was, it's going to be excluded, because then it becomes a known prior act, which is typically excluded anyway. But but they're making it very clear that if you have this specific version and it's still running, any claims from it are not going to be covered. Same is happening with the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability. So I've seen both of them pop up. The other thing that it's doing is it's changing the way that the carriers are doing the underwriting. So for a while, you had a lot of different insurance carriers writing cyber insurance, and they were trying to compete for the market share. And I've never been in that underwriting position. I've been kind of in the broker position. So what I believe that they were doing is they were building models, and I think there were people in the modeling, doing the modeling that said, look, there's these unknown things that we can't account for. But the rest of our book looks great. We've never had any losses. We can start making it more competitive. You kind of race to the bottom with cost, and then race to the top with coverage. You had kind of them going in the different directions. Coverage is expanding while premium is going down. Then SolarWinds happened, and everybody said, remember those unknown risks that we were talking about that we couldn't model? There's a great example of one. So now it's going the other way. So there's a lot of carriers.
Like they happen all the time, honestly.
It's going to. I mean, it's going to. And these are the things that we were talking about, years ago when we were talking to businesses about the things that you can't expect and you can't account for. These are good examples of them. I mean, you're buying a product from Microsoft, and you can't control the vulnerabilities that are out there that people identify. And no matter what you do to patch a 0-day, you're exposed for a certain amount of time, no matter what you do. I think it's changed the insurance industry. Carriers are more careful about what they're doing to underwrite. Not only are they asking more questions, they've now got more supplementals. Prices are going up. The good thing that I'm seeing is that I believe they're starting to interject more technology, not only into underwriting, but also into protecting businesses. So I think some of these things have to happen as the cyber insurance industry evolves.
I mean, that's something we've talked about together a lot. I mean, my feeling on the subject is that it's hard to separate these things, and they're going to become, in my opinion, more and more connected. You can't have the security without the insurance. You can't just buy software that's a countermeasure and then forget about everything. You need risk management, you need insurance, and you can't just buy insurance without providing some sort of countermeasure to protect
100%
the business. So I think that's how it's going to go, and I think it's going to get more and more that way. But it's really interesting. I mean, I have some very like strong opinions about like some of this stuff where it's like, we're required to have like car insurance when we drive. We're required to have health insurance, whatever your thoughts about that might be. But how is it that a company can operate, have my data, maybe not even pay me? Facebook's a big company and I like them very much and they've got plenty of money. So I'm not worried that they won't have money to cover their things. But like, there's lots of small companies. There's lots of companies that are rapidly growing. You talk about like the Clubhouses of the world and all these other, new age apps. Why are they not required to have third party insurance coverage to protect me as a user? Why is there no like rules around this? I just can't imagine like what happens when like my data gets stolen, whether it's like health information or passwords or just privacy. Like, I feel like cyber insurance should be a requirement for businesses in some of those industries.
I agree. And for some it is, but it's coming down through contracts. So it's sort of like, like PCI compliance, where if you're going to do business in this space, you're going to have to do it. It's not a government regulation, but it's, an industry standard that you have to live up to. I think that's how it's developing. And I'd also say, the insurance side of it, I agree that there should be more of a requirement to do it, because you imagine what happens when a business has a major data breach. If they go out of business, you're never going to be made whole. Exactly. Who knows what they're going to do? You don't even know if they're capable of responding, which they probably wouldn't be. So unfortunately, I think it's going to be, it's consumers and the industry pushing on it. And the other side of it, I think, is the requirements to protect our data. I have no confidence in any business out there has both the ability to protect our data or knows what to do when something happens. Now, every state has a data privacy requirement for certain personally identifiable information. But what if it's not PII? What if it's like emails and other types of things that doesn't fit the definition? Yeah. They should probably have.
What if it's my vacation photos?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's a lot that, I think it goes beyond us as a society. We need to take data privacy and security seriously. I think a big challenge for small businesses is the expense. If you think of all the things that you need to do to protect a business, it's expensive and it takes expertise. And I don't think it's an awareness issue anymore. I think for a long time, it was most businesses just weren't aware of the risks. I think they are aware now. I think it's now the ability. Like, they think that it's just too complicated and complex. They don't know how to buy it. They don't know what to buy for insurance. They think they're covered. Maybe the broker that they're working with isn't as experienced with it. They've got an MSP who says that they're covered, or maybe they have nobody helping them. But there's no real guidelines or guidance. And I think in other areas, there's either incentives or some type of stick that requires people to comply. And there's nothing like that for the majority of businesses.
I think it comes down to consumer demand, honestly. I think it's we as consumers need to expect this. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when like organic started to come into supermarkets, and like there were all these stores that like didn't have any organic products. You'd walk into Walmart or Target and there's like nothing that's organic, and it's like, well, when are these chains, these supermarket chains or discount carriers going to start having this stuff? And it's like, well, when consumers demand it, they will start selling only organic stuff. And that's literally what's happened. So you can like walk into your local Walmart and they'll have tons of organic options. Well, the same thing is going to happen in cyber. I mean, I think the average person like relegates the responsibility for their security to like, the government or the their device manufacturer, or worse, like the company they're dealing with. So, we have to understand that, like, it's our right and our responsibility as well to hold these people accountable for it. So, switching gears on that note, what are your thoughts on like personal cybersecurity in general?
So I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's probably 10 years behind where we are with businesses. I just don't think people, like where businesses were years ago of not caring, individuals are so far behind. Like our data's out there and people have almost become complacent, and trying to get people to take their personal cybersecurity as seriously as they do for their business, which isn't where it needs to be. There's a big gap. And then the other problem we're having now is the crossover between work, business, and personal. So I think there's a huge need for it. And I think that could be an area where awareness isn't there. Like we still need to work on awareness before we can get people to change behavior.
Totally. I agree. So, two questions. What advice would you give someone looking to buy cyber coverage? Like what do they need to do? Like what's the first step they should take? They don't have an insurance agent. They just started to think about it. What do they need to do before they find an agent?
So I really think that it does start with your broker. There's a lot of different ways that people can buy cyber insurance today. So there's ways that businesses can go direct online to buy a policy, which is fine for a lot of businesses because they'll get kind of like a policy that's going to cover essentially the 5 things that I went through, but they're not going to get a lot of details. A broker that specializes in cyber insurance, what I do, there's people like me in insurance agencies, around the country. Everybody's not going to have the position because it's new. So really selecting the broker is important because that's the person that's going to help you translate it and find the coverages. So the broker is really important. In addition to that, it's understanding the risk because a business is going to have to think about what's important before they understand the right kind of coverage to buy. So, let's, talk about the, CIS top 20, focus on, inventory, what type of software, hardware, data do you have? If you start there, that's going to help you understand your risk. And if you're extremely reliant on your data and your technology, you have to buy, cyber insurance is a must-have, just as is the technology that you're going to use to protect it. So it's kind of understanding what you have, what you're trying to protect, and then picking the right person to help you make sure that you've got the right coverage in place.
And who kind of decides, or how do you help them decide how much coverage they need? I mean, how do you know if you need $1 million or $5 million?
So right now it's partially dictated by cost. So if it's a brand new coverage for a business, it's going to be part of the budget. And then you're potentially adding thousands of new dollars to your budget for something that you've never purchased. So what we typically like to do is say, let's start here, and then you can start budgeting over time. And what a lot of businesses will do, they'll maybe add $1 million till they get to the point where they want to be. That might be, maybe you're good at 2, maybe you're good at 10, maybe you need 20. It really depends. And it's honestly through conversations, it's through benchmarking that we can do. There's some third-party technology providers that can help pinpoint, taking lots of different types of data into account, what the risk is versus how much you can buy down versus what you can you offset with technology, those types of things. So it's not an easy process. It's very involved. And if you use the technology solutions, they're not going to be perfect either, but at least it gives you some kind of idea about where you need to be.
Totally. Yeah. You kind of want the best you can afford.
The insurance person saying buy as much as you can afford is not what people want to hear, but that's kind of where we are.
Well, you're going to be happy you had it.
Right.
If something happens.
Right.
So the flip side of that question, if you're a person interested in getting into the insurance industry, or maybe you already are an insurance agent, but you don't sell cyber, what's the advice you give that person? How do they become educated about the technical and cyber insurance related stuff? And how do they get into that side of the business?
Yeah. So the number one thing that I would recommend is take non-insurance training. Some of the carriers do a great job providing cyber related training. Some just they don't. So I would look at training, to maybe take some courses on like basic networking or basic security outside of insurance. So that way you've got the foundations of, okay, so what are these policies designed to prevent or protect against? So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is getting out in the community, leveraging, like most of what I learn from businesses that I partner with, working with them through incidents or working with them through mutual clients. You learn a ton that way. The other thing that I would recommend is leveraging resources from carriers. So if somebody is in the insurance industry, there's a lot of carriers that are offering training. There's a lot of providers that are doing the same. So for me, for example, everybody's got letters next to their name because you gotta do that. So I've got the so Chubb is a carrier that we work with and many brokers work with. They've got the cyber the CCIC designation that's through Chubb and Carnegie Mellon. Fantastic opportunity because it not only helps educate on the technical and the insurance, but you're also going to network with people in the space. I've learned a lot from other brokers, dealing with this specific risk, where you can bounce ideas off them, talk about risks. So it's not. There's no direct path. It's a lot of learning. A lot of it's going to be kind of on your own. But I guess that's what I would recommend.
I think there's going to be a lot of room for people to get into the industry because, there's going to be unprecedented growth. It's just starting to grow. Yep. Every business is going to need cyber coverage.
Absolutely.
My last question for you is, for the skeptics out there, can you give us some examples from your personal experience of how cyber insurance got used by your clients over the years? Like what's some of the crazy stuff you've seen?
Yeah, I guess the craziest things that we've seen, it's not that crazy because it's the things that you'd expect. But the top probably 3 are going to be the crime, email compromise, and ransomware. So the crime, the cyber crime losses are pretty tough because what we've seen is sophisticated attacker hijacking one of their known vendors' emails. So
wow,
say you're a business used to dealing with this specific person. You're getting emails from them with invoices. You're going to pay them, and then when you communicate back, you're hovering over the link and all the things you're just supposed to do. It's their email, but somebody's hijacked it. $50,000 worth of invoices, $100,000 worth of invoices are paid, and the money's gone. Those are the tough ones because they're really hard to detect. And then afterwards, you feel like, oh man, everybody's like, I should have caught that. And again, you have to have the right type of social engineering coverage to cover that.
And your bank's not going to refund you.
They're not, because it's not the bank's fault. They're legitimate payments. So they're not. They can try to stop it, and we've seen that happen when you catch it. Things that are in transit you can stop, but what happens is it goes from a U.S. bank to some overseas account, and then it's gone. And the FBI can shut those down, but it doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah,
you can't recover it. So that's the one. The other is going to be like the typical like business email compromise, and that's what's hitting the smaller businesses that are using a cloud hosted email and don't have multi-factor authentication. So somebody hijacks the account, and then they can, they're going to escalate credentials and try to get across the other accounts, look to do things like I just mentioned, but to other people, take all sorts of data. You'd be surprised. Actually, you probably wouldn't, but how much sensitive data people keep in their email.
Absolutely.
So you could be a small business. I don't have a lot of data. Well, when you start digging into the emails, and when you hire a firm to do the forensic investigation of looking at emails, which oftentimes has to be manual, that gets expensive fast. So we've had, clients didn't have the coverage, added the coverage, luckily had that built into their policy, and those types of claims are covered. The other are ransomware, and that's years ago it wasn't as scary because it was more of the random. I'm going to encrypt some random files that might not matter. ransom demands were in the $500 to $1,000 range. Fast forward to today, where ransomware is launched at the end of an attack when the intruder's leaving, when they were there for months exfiltrating data.
Oh yeah.
That's what we're seeing now. And when clients get the demand and the timer starts ticking down and people are very stressed out, it's a tough situation to be in from our side. But I guess some of the best things that I can say from the skeptics that are out there, insurance is going to pay claims like your car insurance policy. But what cyber insurance is going to do is it's going to put you in touch with the providers that do this kind of thing day in and day out. And especially for something like ransomware, they're going to bring in negotiators. You're not going to open a Bitcoin wallet and start paying criminals. The insurance company is going to connect you with, yeah. It's going to provide a person that does this, that's going to take that demand down from, $1 million down to potentially, who knows what they can get it down to. The goal is not to pay them the full amount. And also the goal is to make sure that we understand what data could have been compromised, because ransomware is a piece of it. But what if data was exfiltrated? How do you find that out? So, and this is where the policies are real with the ransomware. This is where they are paying the what you pay in premium tenfold, because a normal business doesn't have access to those providers, and they're not going to think about it in the middle of a crisis situation.
So, just for fun, mm-hmm. what's like the asking price of these ransoms you're seeing? Like,
man, so the recent ones have been in the 500 up to 5 million. I mean, we saw a $5 million demand. I don't know what was paid. We've seen, all sorts of different demands, and we don't. And at that point, the broker is kind of out of it. So we're going to see kind of the initial. But we've also had, there's major. Like hospitals that get the demands, and then some of our clients can potentially get affected by that as well. So,
yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much. This has been a really awesome conversation. It was really helpful to me. I'm sure a lot of people are going to enjoy learning about this industry, and hopefully more people will get interested as business owners and insurance agents become more educated about cyber. So you can connect with Mike at Volk at psafinancial.com. We're going to put up his website and his LinkedIn account on our notes. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, Amir, thanks so much for the conversation. I enjoyed it.